The girl in the alley. The night was cold and wet, rain falling in thin lines under the dim street lamps. Evan walked through the narrow streets of the spaceport city, his boots splashing in shallow puddles. The air smelled of smoke, fuel, and rainwater, the kind of smell that told you the city had too many ships and too little sky. Most people had gone home by now, but there were still shadows moving in the corners, people who lived in the dark and stayed out of sight. He had almost reached his small apartment when he heard it, a soft sound, too weak to be a shout, too pained to be a whisper. He slowed his steps, listening, the rain hitting his shoulders as he looked down a narrow alley between two old metal buildings. There, in the flickering light of a broken lamp, he saw her. An alien girl, curled against the wall, her knees pulled up, her arms wrapped around herself. Her clothes were torn, her skin marked with bruises and scratches, and one leg was bleeding, the dark liquid running down to the wet ground. For a moment, she did not notice him. She was staring at the ground, her lips moving slightly, as if she was talking to herself. From somewhere behind him, a voice spoke. "Don't bother, eh?" Shopkeeper muttered from his doorway. "She's shamed. One of the dirty ones, best to leave her." Another voice joined in. "Not worth the trouble. Human." "She's trouble herself." Evan ignored them, his eyes still on the girl. He stepped into the alley, his boots making small splashes. She lifted her head suddenly, her eyes wide, a flash of fear in them. "Stay away," she said, her voice rough and trembling. Her words carried an accent, and her command was broken, but the warning was clear. He stopped a few steps away, hands open to show he meant no harm. "You're hurt," he said. "Let me help." She shook her head quickly, pressing her back harder against the wall. "No," she whispered, "not worth saving." The rain dripped from her hair and ran down her face like tears. Evan looked at the wound on her leg. It wasn't just a cut, it was deep, and if she didn't get help soon, she could lose more than just the ability to walk. He glanced back toward the street, where the shopkeepers had already turned away. Wanting no part of it, she had no one. He took another step closer, slowly, her eyes narrowed, her body tensed, but she didn't run, maybe because she couldn't. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She looked away, silent. "That's fine," he said. "You can tell me later. Let's get you out of the rain first." When he reached out his hand, she stared at it as if it was something strange and dangerous. Her fingers twitched, but she didn't take it. Instead, she tried to push herself up, only to gasp in pain and nearly fall. Evan caught her before she hit the ground, his hands warm against her cold skin. She froze in his grip, breathing fast. "It's okay," he said. "I've got you." She didn't answer, but she didn't fight either. Evan lifted her carefully, feeling how light she was, too light, as if she hadn't eaten in days. Her head rested against his shoulder for a moment, and he felt the shiver that ran through her. He carried her out of the alley, ignoring the stares of the few people still on the street. Some whispered, some shook their heads. He didn't care. By the time he reached his apartment, she was half asleep. In his arms, the fight gone from her body, he set her gently on the couch and went to find a clean cloth and water. When he came back, she was watching him with wary eyes, her hands gripping the edge of the blanket he had thrown over her. "This will hurt," he warned softly as he began cleaning the wound. She didn't flinch, didn't make a sound, even when the cloth came away red. It was as if she had learned long ago that showing pain made things worse. When he finished, he wrapped her leg carefully. "You'll be okay," he said. Though he wasn't sure if she believed him, she looked at him for a long time, as if searching for the trick in his words. Finally, she whispered something he almost didn't hear. "Why?" "Because," he said simply, "you needed someone." Her eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing. Evan stood, turning off the small heater near the wall. "You can sleep here tonight," he told her. "The bed's yours. I'll take the floor." Her mouth opened, as if she wanted to argue, but then she closed it. Pulling the blanket closer, he turned away to give her privacy, but even with his back to her, He could feel her eyes on him, and though the room was still cold, something in the air had already begun to change. The rain had stopped by morning, but the air still carried the smell of wet metal and stone. Evan sat in the small kitchen, sipping his first cup of coffee, the steam curling up toward the dim light. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. He glanced toward the couch where he had left her last night, wondering if she was still there or if she had slipped away in the night. She was still there, sitting upright now, wrapped in the blanket like a cocoon. Her eyes followed him as he moved, but she said nothing. Evan placed a cup of warm tea on the table beside her. "It's for you," he said gently. She hesitated before taking it, her fingers thin and pale against the mug. She sniffed it first, then took a small sip, as if testing for danger. "It's just tea," he assured her, with a faint smile. After a few moments, he spoke again. "You didn't tell me your name." She looked down at the blanket, her hands tightening around it. For a long time, there was only the faint hum of the heater. Finally, in a voice so soft it was almost lost in the air, she whispered Lyra. The way she said it carried a weight, as if the name itself was heavy with shame. Evan repeated it quietly, "Lyra," and she flinched. "I can call you something else if you want," he offered. She shook her head. "It is my name," she said. "Just Dangerous." He didn't press for more, but the word dangerous stayed in his mind. Instead, he focused on helping her. He cleaned her wound again, this time in better light. The cut was deep, but it wasn't infected, and he made sure the bandage was tight but comfortable. She watched him work with an expression he couldn't quite read, not fear exactly, but not trust either. When he finished, she leaned back slightly, the blanket still covering most of her body. "I'll get some food for you," Evan said, reaching for his coat. She stiffened. "You? Leaving?" "Just for a short while," he said. "I'll be back before you know it." Her eyes darted to the door, then back to him. For a moment he thought she might ask to come with him, but instead, she stayed silent. When he stepped outside, he made sure to lock the door, not to keep her in, but to keep others out. It took him less than an hour to return, carrying a small bag of fresh bread, dried fruit, and some packaged meals. When he came in, she was sitting in the exact same place, as if she hadn't moved at all. He set the food down on the table and handed her a piece of bread. She stared at it for a few seconds, then took a cautious bite. The way her eyes softened made him realize it might have been the first proper food she'd had in days. Later, as she ate slowly, Evan asked, "Do you have anywhere to go? Friends? Family?" Her answer was short, "No." He waited, but she didn't explain further. He wanted to know what had happened to her, why she had been in that alley, why the shopkeepers called her shamed, but he knew pushing too soon might make her shut down completely. That night, when it was time to sleep, Evan brought out an extra blanket and laid it on the floor for himself. "You take the bed," he said, nodding toward his small sleeping space. She looked at him like he had spoken something strange. "No," she said firmly, "I can sleep here. Your leg needs rest," he replied, "and that couch won't help." Her eyes lingered on him for a moment before she stood. Still holding the blanket around her shoulders, she moved toward the bed. Slowly, almost reluctantly, before lying down, she said in a low voice, "No one ever give me bed before." Evan didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. He turned off the light, settling onto the floor. The room was quiet again, except for the soft sound of her breathing. At some point in the night, he thought, he heard her murmur his name, though he wasn't sure if it was a dream. And when the morning light touched the room, she was still there, still in his bed. But for the first time since he had found her, she looked like she had actually slept. The days began to follow a quiet rhythm. Evan would wake early, make coffee for himself and tea for Lyra. She would sit at the small table, always wrapped in the blanket, eating slowly, as if each bite had to be thought about. Her leg was healing, but she still walked with a slight limp. She spoke little, but her eyes no longer carried the same raw panic they had on that first night. One morning, Evan returned from a short trip to the market. He carried a small packet of dried sweet fruit, the kind children in the city loved. When he placed it on the table, Lyra tilted her head in quiet curiosity. "It's for you," he said. "Try it." She picked up a piece, sniffed it, then took a bite. For the briefest moment, the corners of her lips turned upward. It was not a full smile, but it was there, soft, quick, and almost shy. Evan caught it, and it made something warm stir in his chest. "You like it?" he asked. Her eyes darted away. "It's good," she said softly. He didn't push for more, but in that small moment, he knew a wall had shifted between them. She was beginning to trust him, even if she didn't know it herself. Later that day, while Evan fixed a loose panel on the apartment's heater, he heard a faint humming. It took him a second to realize it was coming from the kitchen. When he peeked in, he found Lyra standing by the stove, carefully pouring hot water into 2 cups. She was humming a tune, low, almost hesitant, but it carried a softness he had not heard from her before. When she noticed him watching, she froze, the hum stopping instantly. "I didn't mean to," she began. "It's fine," he said, smiling. "It's nice to hear." That night, the peace broke. It started with a heavy knock on the door. Evan stood up from his seat, motioning for Lyra to stay in the bedroom. He opened the door, to find 3 alien men standing there, their eyes cold and sharp. One of them, tall and wearing a dark coat, spoke in a deep voice. "You have something that belongs to us, human." Evan's grip on the door tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man's gaze hardened. "The girl, bring her out." From the corner of his eye, Evan saw movement. Lyra was standing just behind him, her face pale, but her chin lifted. "Go back," he whispered to her, but she didn't move. The man in the coat took a step forward. "She is marked," he said. "You know what that means, human. She's an outcast. We're here to take her back where she belongs." Evan stepped fully into the doorway, blocking their path. "She's not going anywhere," he said firmly. The other 2 men shifted, their hands twitching toward their belts, but the man in the coat only smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. "You're making a mistake," he said. "You can't protect her forever." With that, he turned and walked away, the others following. The sound of their boots faded down the hall, leaving behind a heavy silence. Evan shut the door, locking it quickly. When he turned, Lyra was staring at him, her hands trembling slightly. "You stood in front of me," she said, her voice almost questioning. "Of course I did," he replied. "No one's taking you." Her lips parted, as if she wanted to say something else, but instead, she simply nodded. The blanket around her shoulders slipped a little, revealing a faint, strange mark on her collarbone, a mark that looked burned into her skin. Evan didn't ask about it yet, but he knew it had something to do with why they were after her that night. Lyra moved her blanket and sat near the heater while Evan worked on securing the door. She kept glancing at him, as if still surprised he had refused to hand her over. When he finally sat down, she offered him the last piece of the sweet fruit. He took it, and for the first time, she smiled fully, not a shy twitch of the lips, but a real smile. It was small and a little uncertain, but it was warm, and in that moment, Evan knew he wasn't just protecting her anymore. He was becoming the only safe place she had left in the world. The night after the visitors came was heavy with silence. Evan sat at the small table, pretending to read a news screen, but his eyes kept drifting to the closed bedroom door. Lyra had gone inside hours ago, saying nothing, but he could feel the weight of her thoughts, even from here. Outside, the city's noise had faded to the hum of distant engines. Rain tapped softly against the window. Evan finally stood, walked to the bedroom, and knocked gently. There was no answer, but when he pushed the door open, he found her sitting on the edge of the bed. The blanket was around her shoulders, her eyes fixed on the floor. "You didn't eat dinner," he said quietly. She didn't look up. "I'm not hungry." He stepped closer, leaning on the door frame. "You need to tell me who those men were." Her fingers tightened on the blanket. "They're from my clan," she said after a long pause. "They said you were an outcast," Evan replied. "Why?" Lyra's lips trembled before she spoke. "I saw something I was not supposed to see," she whispered. "They met in the high hall, the leaders, and they spoke of killing one of our own to take her place. A powerful elder. I was only there to bring water, but I heard everything." She swallowed hard, her voice shaking. "When they saw me, they smiled and told me I was mistaken. But the next day, they called me before the court. They accused me of shameful acts, lies, to destroy my name." Evan felt his jaw tighten. "They branded me," she continued, her hand moving to the faint mark on her collarbone. "This means I am nothing. No one will help me. No one will believe me. They said if I spoke again, I would be killed." Her eyes lifted to his, dark with pain. "But I ran, and now they want me back. Not to forgive, but to silence." Evan crossed the room and crouched in front of her. "They won't get you," he said firmly. Her expression softened just slightly, but there was doubt in her voice. "Many say such words, human, but when danger comes, they step away." "I won't step away," he said. "Not now, not ever." That night, she tried to sleep, but the shadows seemed too deep. Evan stayed in the main room, but he heard her moving, pacing. When he opened the bedroom door, she was standing by the window, looking out at the rain. "I can't stop seeing their faces," she said in a low voice. "Even when I close my eyes." He walked over, gently, pulling the blanket tighter around her. "You're safe here," he said. "No one will come through that door without going through me first." She looked at him for a long moment, her lips parting as if to speak. Instead, her body seemed to relax for the first time in hours. When she finally lay down, her eyes were still open, but her breathing slowed. Evan sat in the chair beside the bed, keeping watch until her eyelids closed. He stayed there long after she slept, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing. The city outside could keep its secrets, but in this room, he would protect hers. By morning, the air felt lighter. Lyra was already awake, sitting quietly at the table with a cup of tea. She didn't say much, but when Evan looked at her, she didn't look away. Something unspoken had passed between them during the night. Not just words, but a fragile thread of trust. Evan knew the danger wasn't over. The men would be back, and they wouldn't come alone. But now he also knew her truth, and that made his resolve stronger than ever. Because this wasn't just about helping a stranger anymore. This was about standing against the kind of cruelty that destroyed people, like her. And as he watched her sip her tea in the pale morning light, he knew he would fight that cruelty for as long as it took. The morning started with an unease Evan couldn't shake. Lyra moved quietly through the apartment, helping him pack a small bag. They both knew the men from her clan would return. When they did, they wouldn't knock politely. "We can't stay here," Evan said, as he slid supplies into the bag. "They know where to find us now." Lyra kept her eyes on the floor, her hands clutching the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. "They will keep coming," she whispered, "until I am gone. Then we'll make sure they don't catch you," Evan replied, his voice steady. They left the apartment just after sunrise. The streets were quieter than usual. The city, still shaking off the night. Evan guided her through narrow back lanes, avoiding open plazas where eyes could follow them. Lyra walked carefully, her limp slowing her pace, but she refused to complain. When the sound of footsteps echoed behind them, Evan tensed. He pulled her into a small storage alcove until the strangers passed. Their path took them into the old freight tunnels beneath the spaceport. The air was damp, the lights flickering. The tunnels were rarely used now, but that also meant they were less likely to be found here. Still, Evan kept one hand near the weapon at his belt. Lyra's breathing was uneven, but her gaze stayed forward. Every step felt like it took them further from safety, but also closer to escape. Halfway through the tunnels, her wound opened again. She stumbled, clutching her leg, as fresh blood seeped through the bandage. Evan knelt beside her, his brow furrowed. You can't keep walking like this, he said. Her jaw tightened. I can. You shouldn't have to, he replied, without waiting for her protest. He lifted her into his arms. Her body tensed at first, but then she rested her head lightly against his shoulder. They found shelter in an abandoned storage bay, the door barely hanging on its hinges. Evan set her down gently and went to work. Rewrapping her leg, she watched him in silence, her eyes soft in the dim light. Why? She asked suddenly. Why are you risking so much for me? He met her gaze without hesitation. Because you deserve to live, he said simply. Her lips parted as if she wanted to reply, but no words came. They stayed hidden until nightfall. Evan kept watch near the door, listening for any sound that didn't belong. Lyra sat against the wall, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. In the stillness, she spoke again. When I was cast out, I thought I would die alone, she said, but now, I am not sure. Evan turned his head toward her. You won't die, not while I'm here. When the sun disappeared, they moved again. They slipped through a maintenance hatch that led to the far edge of the city. There, the streets gave way to the outer districts, rougher, poorer, and far more dangerous. But it was also a place where people asked fewer questions. Evan hoped it would buy them time, yet even in the crowd, he could feel eyes on them. Two figures followed at a distance, their steps matching theirs. Evan's hand tightened on his weapon. We're being watched, he murmured to Lyra. Her grip on his arm tightened, but she didn't panic. Instead, she lifted her chin, as if daring them to come closer. They reached a narrow bridge over a drainage canal. The followers quickened their pace. Evan stopped in the middle of the bridge, turning to face them. One of the men smirked. She's worth a lot, human. Hand her over and maybe we'll let you walk away. Evan stepped in front of Lyra, his voice low and cold. You'll have to go through me first. The men hesitated, perhaps expecting him to back down, when he didn't. They exchanged a look and retreated into the shadows. Evan knew it wouldn't be the last time. They had only just begun the hunt, and it would end only when her enemies were gone, or when they were caught. But as they continued walking, Lyra's hand stayed on his arm. She didn't look afraid anymore, and in the quiet between them, he realized she was starting to believe his promise. The hiding and running could not last forever. Evan knew it, and Lyra knew it too. By the third night in the outer districts, the air itself felt tense. Every shadow seemed to hold a shape. Every footstep behind them felt too close. They had taken shelter in an old hangar at the edge of the city. Rust covered the walls, and the smell of oil and dust hung in the air. Evan found an old crate to block the door, but he knew it wouldn't stop anyone determined to get in. Lyra sat in the corner, the blanket still around her shoulders, her eyes scanning the dark corners of the room. You think they will find us tonight? She asked quietly. Evan glanced toward the door. I think they're already close. His words proved true. Less than an hour later, boots pounded on the floor outside. A deep voice called through the thin metal wall. Human hand over the girl, and you can live. Evan rose to his feet, stepping in front of Lyra. His hand rested on the weapon at his side. Go, he whispered to her. Find somewhere to hide. But she shook her head sharply. No, I will not leave you. The hangar door rattled, then slammed open. 3 of the clan's enforcers entered, their faces hard. Behind them came the man in the dark coat, the same one from the apartment. His smile was thin and sharp. You've made this more difficult than it needed to be, he said to Evan. She stays with me, Evan replied without moving. The man's eyes flicked to Lyra. You know what she is, marked, shamed, liar. She's not a liar, Evan said, his voice steady. She told me what you did. That made the man's smile vanish. She told you nothing that matters, he said coldly. She will be silenced tonight. Before Evan could respond, Lyra stepped forward. Her voice was low, but firm. Not before they hear the truth. From inside the folds of her blanket, she pulled out a small recording device. A faint blue light blinked on its surface. You thought I was too weak to fight you, but I kept this, she said. With a single press, the device played. Voices, the voices of the clan leaders plotting murder. Their words were clear, their laughter cold. The enforcers froze, their eyes darting to each other. Even the man in the dark coat took a step back. You don't know what you've done, he hissed. I know exactly what I've done, Lyra replied. This will go to the council, and you will lose everything. One of the enforcers lunged forward, but Evan moved first. The fight was short, but fierce. Evan's fist met the attacker's jaw, sending him sprawling. The second came in with a blade, but Evan twisted his arm, forcing the weapon to the ground. The third hesitated, then backed away when Lyra aimed the recording device toward him like it was a weapon. In that moment, the man in the coat made his choice. He turned and fled into the shadows, leaving his men behind. Evan grabbed Lyra's arm, pulling her toward the back exit. They ran through the night, the sound of shouts fading behind them. Lyra's legs slowed her down, but Evan stayed close, half carrying her when she stumbled. By the time they reached the safety of the old freight tunnels, her breathing was ragged. You kept it, Evan said between breaths. That recording. You held on to it all this time. She nodded, her voice trembling. It was all I had to prove. I wasn't lying. They stopped in a small maintenance room. Evan closed the door and leaned against it, listening for any sign of pursuit. Lyra sank to the floor, pulling the blanket tighter. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, there was no fear there, only determination. They won't stop, she said. But now, we can end this. Evan nodded slowly. Then we'll end it together. Outside, the city was waking. The hunt was not over, but something had shifted for the first time since that night in the alley. They were not just running, they were fighting back, and in the dim light of the maintenance room, the two of them knew the final move was coming. The morning light crept slowly into the tunnels. Evan and Lyra moved quietly, the recording device hidden deep inside his coat. They were heading toward the Central Council District, a place where the clan's power could not easily reach. Lyra's steps were slow, her limp still visible, but her eyes no longer carried the hopeless weight they once had. When they emerged from the underground passage, the city looked different in the daylight. Crowds bustled in the streets, vendors shouted, children ran between market stalls. For a moment, Lyra hesitated, holding the edge of her blanket, as if it could hide her from the world. Evan glanced at her. It's all right, they can't hurt you here. She nodded slowly, but her grip on the fabric didn't loosen. Inside the council hall, the air felt colder. Guards at the entrance eyed them with suspicion. Evan stepped forward, showing the device. We have evidence, urgent. The guards exchanged glances, but finally led them through winding halls to a tall chamber filled with seated council members. At the sight of Lyra, a few murmurs spread among the audience. She's marked, someone whispered. Evan ignored them, standing beside her as she stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice was steady. You called me a liar, she began. You shamed me, cast me out, and tried to make me vanish. She raised the device and pressed the button. The voices filled the chamber, plotting, laughing, deciding the fate of the elder they planned to kill. The sound echoed off the walls, and the room fell silent. The council members leaned forward, their expressions changing from doubt to anger. This is true, the head counselor demanded. Yes, Lyra replied. I saw it, I lived it, and they hunted me because I refused to die quietly. Evan stood tall beside her, his presence a silent shield. When the head counselor ordered guards to seize the men named in the recording, Lyra's eyes widened. It was over. Not the danger, not all at once, but the weight of disbelief and shame had been lifted. After hours of testimony and questioning, the council dismissed them. Outside, the sun was low in the sky, bathing the streets in gold. Evan glanced at her. Where do you want to go now? She was quiet for a moment, looking out over the busy market. I don't want to go back to my clan, she said. Even if they begged me, it's not home anymore. Then where is home? Evan asked. Her eyes met his, and there was a faint smile on her lips. Wherever you are, she said softly. They walked back toward the outer districts, not because it was safer, but because it was theirs for now. The old apartment was gone. They couldn't return there, but Evan had a small place on the edge of the trade port. It wasn't much, just 2 rooms and a view of the ships lifting into the sky. When they stepped inside, Lyra paused in the doorway. It's warm, she murmured. It feels safe. That night, Evan brought out a thin mattress and set it on the floor. You take the bed, he said, just as he had the first night. But this time, Lyra shook her head. You take it, she said. I'll stay here. Evan started to protest, but she stepped closer, her voice quiet. We share. There was no hesitation in her tone, no fear, like before. Evan nodded slowly, moving the blanket so they could both fit. When they lay down, she turned toward him, her hand finding his in the dark. Do you remember the alley? She asked. I do, he replied. I thought my life ended that night, she whispered. But it began again, because of you. Evan didn't answer right away, only tightened his fingers around hers. The rain began to fall outside, tapping against the window. For the first time, it didn't sound lonely. Lyra's breathing slowed as she drifted to sleep, her head resting against his shoulder. Evan closed his eyes, knowing the fight had been worth every risk, because here, in this small room, with the sound of rain and the warmth of someone who had finally found safety, they had built something no one could take away. A home, and for Lyra, a place where she was no longer wounded, no longer shamed, and never alone again.